Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining us again here at Cold Case Christianity. We're doing a couple of weeks where we are answering listener emails. So if you watched last week or you listened to the podcast last week, you know that we covered three topics, three questions, and we can do that in about 30 minutes, I think, and we'll try to do that again today. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do I ever get a question into this guy? Well, okay. One way to do it is to subscribe to our weekly, our daily email blast, which I send out every day about 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And it comes out and it will actually deliver to your inbox one of the 3 articles I write each week, or the podcast I do each week, or a video that I post each week. You'll have access to that information directly to your inbox, and you can watch it from your phone. Also, of course, that stuff's all available on our phone app, so you can do it that way. But it also gives you a chance. I think the phone app actually has a way to email me directly, so that's another way to reach me. So if you're getting the weekly or daily email, I should say, if you just hit reply, it's going to come back to me. And then you get a chance to submit a question. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance for anyone who has already submitted a question or might submit a question on the basis of these shows. Because I'll just tell you, I have no staff, and just one guy, a retired detective, who is writing and working as hard as I can to provide materials to the church and to all of you who watch our show and listen to our podcast. And that means I'm buried. So I'm just grateful to get through 6 questions in a couple of weeks here. At least those are 6 less emails I've got in my box, right? So I will try my best to get back to you, but please be patient with me and understand that I may never be able to get back given the nature of this kind of work. And you can see, if you took and transcribed each of my 10-minute answers, right, on this podcast, you would see there's thousands of words in those answers. So you can imagine trying to type that out, right? This doesn't happen anymore for me. It used to in the old days, but now I'm just too consumed with the other work. So please forgive me in advance. Now, so this week, once again, we're doing the old school show. No screen in the background. We're just going to answer listener email. And if I'm right, like the other shows we've done in this genre, people love these shows because they get to see answers kind of more on the cuff. I don't rehearse these. I've not written my answer to these. I've just pulled the top 6 out of my inbox. Here we go. So let's start with the first one now, which I think is an interesting one because as I read it, I realized that the writer, who is a Christian, was kind of figuring this out as he was writing it to me. In other words, it's like it kind of dawned on him, the dilemma he is in, as he was writing the email. And so I'll read it to you and you see if you hear what I'm talking about. So here it is. He says, I have been in discussions with Latter-day Saints. Most state something to the effect that they have a personal testimony from the Holy Spirit to the truthfulness of Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, etc. I've contrasted this with the way evangelicals judge teachings and revelations alleged to be from God. We use the scriptures as a ruler to measure their truthfulness. By the way, you'll see the typos. I leave those in when they're sent to me. Then I was asked, how do you know the scriptures are true? Now you see that the light bulb kind of goes on. It seems that I have to say through the inner witness of the Spirit. Doesn't that put me in the same position as the Latter-day Saint? My subjective experience is the foundation for my knowing what is true. I think that was an eye-opener when I first got it, because this is the dilemma that much of my work is based on. As a matter of fact, this is really the starting point for all of my work as a Christian case maker, because if you know my story, and most of you do, who watch this show or listen regularly, I was an atheist at 35 who came from a family of atheists and Mormons. And so when I became interested in the Christian worldview, I bought a Bible. But I was given a Book of Mormon by my family. So I bought the whole quad, all the scriptures of the Book of Mormon, the 4 scriptures, right? The Old and New Testament, Book of Mormon, Doctrines and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price. I read through all of it. And I applied the same measuring stick, the same template for eyewitness reliability to both sets of texts. I often say that I became a Christian the same day that I became a not Mormon. Why? Because that process that I used to determine whether something is a reliable eyewitness statement verified one set of scriptures while it falsified the other. That's how I became a Christian. It took about 6 months to move through that process. I was at it every day. I was obsessed. So here, pardon me, here I think he's discovered the very thing that I knew all along. That we have to have some way to measure whether or not a claim is true outside and beyond our experience. Our experience even of what we think is, as he puts it, the inner witness of the Spirit. I'm not denying the Spirit's work at all. At all. The question I have is, how do you know that experience you're having is from God? Is in fact the inner witness of the Spirit? Because every Mormon I know will tell you that they had the Spirit of God confirm for them that Joseph Smith is a prophet and that the Book of Mormon is true. This gentleman discovered that when he tried to contrast that with why he believed the Bible was true, he found himself with nothing more to add. That is the problem. We cannot have an answer and an approach to truth that's exactly the same as our Mormon friends, because we know that that approach didn't lead them to truth. That approach was not good enough to protect them from error. So we can't take the same approach ourselves. I think I told you that Peter Boghossian, who is a professor in Portland, has written a book called A Manual for Training or Creating Atheists, in which he tells his atheist brethren that there's no point in talking about the evidence to Christians, because Christians are not Christians because of evidence. They're Christians because of their emotional experience. Wow. He sounds like me training Christians to interact with Mormons. Because it's true for Mormons. They didn't become a Mormon because of any evidence. You can't find archaeological evidence to support the Book of Mormon. You can't find document evidence to support the transmission of the Book of Mormon. All the stuff that we rely on as Christians to know that this document we have in front of us has been protected, transmitted faithfully, and contains truth is not available to the Mormons. It doesn't measure up. So we have to take, why wouldn't we want to go in the one direction we could go, which our Mormon brethren can't go? We could be evidentialists. They can't. We could. Why shouldn't we take that approach then with them to help them see the truth? That's really what it comes down to for us, is that we have to have a different view. We have to have a more forensic approach to our faith, because we're the one group that could take that approach and make a case on the basis of evidence. And I try to do that in Cold Case Christianity and in God's Crime Scene. And I hope that if you've read those two books, they've made you more aware of the evidence so you can make the case to others. Because you're right. If this just comes down to the inner testimony of what you think is the Holy Spirit, you aren't in a position to claim that's true any more powerfully than your Christian friends, your Mormon friends rather, because they are going to say the same thing. At some point, you've got my experience of the Spirit versus your experience of the Spirit. Who's got a real experience of the Spirit? That's the question. Or maybe both of us, maybe none of us have an experience of the Spirit. But we have to find some way to corroborate this outside of our experience, right? Because he made a point of saying this. He says, my subjective experience is the foundation for my knowing what is true. Really? Well then, if everything is just a matter of subjective truth, there is no overarching objective reality. If you're saying that your subjective experience is for the foundation for you knowing what is true, then how can you argue with somebody else who's had a different subjective experience? That's the problem. We have to have something more than our subjective experience, because by the way, Scripture tells us something about your heart, right? Oh, trust your heart. The culture is always saying, trust your heart, trust your heart. Scripture says just the opposite. Don't trust your heart. Your heart is wicked and easily deceived. So don't trust it. You can't trust your emotions to get you to the right place all the time. I do trust my emotions often, my intuition, but I'm going to base everything on the balance of what I know to be true. Hope that helps you. Take a break, come back, and we'll answer another question. I did 26 years working casework, and the better half of that in the end was working cold cases. And those cases got on national media. I think I've been on Dateline more than any other detective in the country. And the people who are involved in the process, if it's not that show or other media shows, are not always believers, but they get a sense of, well, this guy can puzzle a case together. Not that I'm the only one who can do that, but you develop that skill set. If you're working in this industry, trust me, if you're out there watching this video, you know, if you're a cop, how to put a case together. So once you've demonstrated that, I think, for people, they may not agree with your conclusion, but remember, the evidence doesn't say anything. And science doesn't say anything. It's scientists and evidence evaluators that say something. So we're all looking at the same data points. We're all looking at the same evidence. I've got to draw an inference from the evidence, and I land it this way. Now, you may not agree with my inferences, but I think you can at least respect the fact that I've done the homework of presenting the evidence so an audience can assess it for themselves. So that's why I think I have supporters who don't agree with my inferences, but they respect the process. And that's one of the things I try to do uniquely in God's Crime Scene. I'm trying to give the readers not just here are the facts, but here are how detectives assemble facts to develop a case. Here are the processes, the rules that we obey, how we put a cumulative case together. How do we make cases? That's what I want you to come away with also, not just here are the facts, because you can get that out of any book. I want this to be unique in the sense that this is a book that not only gives you the data, but it instructs you on how to build a case, how to put the data together. Okay, in some ways this is similar to the last question, but in slightly different directions. So let's take a look at it. This is somebody who read my article on moral truth and disagrees that objective moral truth rather, requires a objective moral foundation. Something that transcends us subjectively. Here's what he says. And I have edited some of this, so you'll see that I have taken out, and you'll see the dots, because this was a much longer email. It says, we seem to agree that moral standards exist. People have them, use them, appeal to them. Your question seems to be, is there an ultimate moral standard beyond those we have here in our known universe? The answer seems to be no. We don't know of any ultimate moral standard. We create moral standards, terms, and definitions. Given those standards, we can say that certain actions are wrong. Yes, those standards reflect our interests, values, preferences, and so on. You say that on subjectivism, you cannot say that another action is wrong. This is false. Since morality is a reflection of our own preferences, etc., I can say it's wrong or evil. I don't prefer it. Those who are situated as I am, averse to pain, or concerned about the pain of others, should avoid it, being in or causing painful situations, etc. What I can't do is say that it's objectively wrong, i.e. that it violates a known standard that somehow exists out of our universe. You'll see in these emails I often leave in the typos. Okay, now he's made a couple claims here. Interesting claims. I think it's true that people who are subjectivists can make claims. They can say something is good or bad. The question is, should we listen to them? That's really the question. Yes, all kinds of people holding all different views of truth will make all kinds of claims. The only question is, do we care? Why should I care what your view? Of course, you can always appeal. You can always find something that's so outrageous that you could say, well, if you don't see what's wrong with that view, there's something wrong with you. But there's a lot of nuance in terms of killing, for example. Some killing is justified in every culture. Figuring out what the objective standard is, there are some things that, when you make a statement like this, and he says that we don't know of any ultimate moral standards. That's what he says. Really? We don't know, you don't want to call them ultimate? But we do know of standards, of truth claims, moral truth claims, that transcend every known culture at any point in history, anywhere in the world. It's never been okay to torture babies for the fun of it. Never has. Never will be. There's no civilization. Well, Jim, aren't there people who would feed their babies to the gods or kill them and sacrifice them to the gods? They're not doing it for the fun of it. They're doing it for what they think is a purpose to appease that God. That's very different than just killing someone for the fun of it. As a matter of fact, that expression "for the fun of it" is what I would argue, if you attach that to any act under question, it's never been okay to steal for the fun of it in any culture, anywhere, in history, anywhere. Now, here's my point. When you find these transcendent, objective, they're common to every culture regardless of who you are. That's what we mean by transcendent. They transcend all cultures. As a matter of fact, I often offer this in the book God's Crime Scene. If there is a Star Trek reality in which there are beings out there that are humanoids, but not humans, like Romulans and Klingons, it would also not be okay to torture their babies for the fun of it. Now, you've discovered that this moral law we were talking about not only transcends every subject, every culture, it also transcends the species on these planets. What do we ground that in? That's all we're asking here. How do we ground that? You can say, well, we all agree, it's our subjective opinion. Well, no, it's not really our subjective opinion. If it's common to everyone, then there's no subject who denies it. Now, if he does, you would say, that guy's got something wrong with him. Well, why? Because you recognize it also as a transcendent moral obligation. This is the whole point. Where do we ground these things? And the point I'm making here is that, yes, I could easily say that I believe sex with animal, bestiality. What's wrong with that? Who's it hurting? I should be able to do that, right? So the question is, how do I basically justify this? Do I need to justify it? Well, of course you do. We would say it's wrong. That's wrong. That's a wrong act. But if it's just a matter of my personal opinion, and I could argue not only is it my personal opinion, in our culture, we've been doing that for 150 years. We have been doing that consistently in our culture. We've been doing it for 1,000 years. That's how we do things over here. Who are you to tell us we can't do that? Well, now you've got a problem, don't you? Because if all truth is grounded in the subject or the culture, a slightly larger group, you don't have any right to tell them they're wrong. Again, it comes down to that issue. Why should we listen to you? You see the problem with that? That's why we have to look at this as an issue of transcendent responsibility. There is a law that transcends all the laws. The only question is, where could this kind of law come from? If it's coming from, and by the way, one more point on this. These are subjective moral, not just subjective moral truths. That would be interesting enough and difficult enough to explain. These are transcendent, objective obligations, moral obligations. Think about that for a second. You don't have a moral obligation to your laws of physics or to the tree outside. You only have a moral obligation to other persons. If there is an objective, transcendent moral obligation, and there are dozens of them, we could talk about that forever. I think even he would recognize that. The question is, what is the objective, transcendent moral person to whom we are obligated? That's really what we're talking about here. So I think in the end, yes, he's right. As a subjectivist, he can make claims. I wouldn't deny that. The question is, why should I listen to him? Unless he's going to argue, well, this is a claim that you should listen to me because it transcends both of us. It's not just my opinion. And he says, look, those who are situated as he is, in other words, they share his beliefs. He said, since morality is a reflection of our own preferences, I can say it's wrong or evil. I don't prefer it. Those who are situated as I am should avoid it. Well, really? What if they're not situated as you are? They don't have to avoid it? If you think it's okay to extort someone for money, you say it's not okay to do that, but they say it is okay to extort people for money. Well, they could argue, I'm not situated like you are. In my situation, I should be able to do this. So should we have no law about extorting money? No, it's not just the people who are situated like you. There are some things you would say transcend both you and even groups that aren't situated like you. That's the problem. Those are the objective, transcendent moral truths we're trying to ground. How do we ground those? If they exist, how do they exist? Who is the objective, transcendent moral person to whom we are obligated? That's the real question. All right, take another break. We'll come back and ask the last question.
Be sure to visit the Cold Case Christianity website daily to read Jim's blog, watch the weekly video, or listen to the Cold Case Christianity podcast. You'll also find great free resources, including the free downloadable monthly Bible insert. While you're there, be sure to sign up for Jim's daily case note email. Cold Case Christianity is designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker. Connect with Cold Case Christianity on social media. Visit the Cold Case Christianity homepage and click the social media icons on the top right toolbar. Jim is active on Facebook and Twitter, posting the best apologetics articles from over 250 Christian blogs around the country. You'll also find links to Jim's Instagram, Pinterest, and Google Plus accounts, along with the link to the Cold Case Christianity YouTube page. Stay connected with Cold Case Christianity and become a better Christian casemaker.
Okay, this is from a listener in Italy, so he apologizes for his English, but I think he did a pretty good job. Let me read you what he says. He says, on many sites, I read of atheists, much of what they contest is that the apostles' story of martyrdom is much like the belief for some Islamic people to bomb themselves, or they just lied in hopes to get higher ranks and social status, or they were just not the true writers of the books. I know there are many points, but I believe in the word of Jesus, and I would like to counter them with strong evidence, as you always do. Thanks. Okay. Now, there's lots of points here. Just to talk about, well, if they don't believe that the original writers are the writers of the books. Let me just touch on that first really quickly, and then we'll go to the issue of martyrdom. I've always argued that when people make claims against the traditional authorship of the Gospels, they'll say, oh, that's not John the Apostle who wrote the Gospel of John. That's not really Matthew who wrote Matthew. Okay, that's really the two they're going to attack, right? Because Mark doesn't claim to be. We know that Mark, according to Papias in the first century, is a disciple of Peter who is writing down Peter's testimony in Rome as he's preaching to the local congregation there. And so that's how Mark's gospel comes into play. So that's not even an issue. And we know that Luke doesn't even call himself an original eyewitness. He describes the fact that he was not part of the original eyewitnesses, but was interviewing those who had contact. So all of that, get that. But it's really Matthew and John where you get this claim, right, that you can't trust that it's Matthew and John, the apostles Matthew and John. Well, from my perspective, what I'm really concerned about is, does that book contain the eyewitness account of somebody who was there to see what Jesus did and said? I'll be honest, do I really care if it was John the Apostle? I want to know, is it reliable eyewitness testimony? It could be from Joe Schmo down at the corner bakery. I don't care. I really am concerned about, is the testimony in that gospel a reliable record of what occurred in the first century? That's it. I think there's good reasons to trust the traditional attributions of the Gospels. I've made a case for this on coldcasechristianity.com. But do I think it's worth us arguing? You don't think it's John? It's some other John? The question is it entirely fiction? Not, do you know which witness? Now, you might argue, well, it's been falsely attributed to Matthew because it's a lie. We're going to test the account. Don't get me wrong. I've done that. We all do that as we kind of look critically at any text. That's what I used that 4-part template for, right? Were they early? Do they have any way to be confirmed by confirmation through some other corroborative evidence? Do they change their story over time? And are they biased? Those are the issues. The issue about whether it's an elder named John or John the Apostle, I simply want to know, does the account contain reliable eyewitness testimony? Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, he talks here about the martyrdoms. I'm not sure that all of the disciples were martyred the way it's recorded in early church history. Sean McDowell has done a wonderful job on a book that he wrote as his PhD dissertation, in which he examines the claims of martyrdom, of the deaths of the disciples, based on the evidence available to us in any early record. And he's gradated, he's kind of given a grading system to those records that he thinks are the most reliable accounts of the apostolic deaths, and those that he thinks are not as reliable. I think he's done a wonderful job. It's an expensive book. It's on Amazon. Sean McDowell is the author. But we've written about this, and he and I kind of talked about it back and forth all during the process of which he was writing the book. And I can tell you that I've written a bunch of articles at Cold Case Christianity. Just type in martyr, and you'll see all the articles I've written. I don't think it matters so much to me that I know precisely how each one died. I do know this. We know, evidentially, there were non-Christian authors in the first 50 to 70 years of Christianity who would write against Christianity, who would easily have said, this guy recanted, or that guy recanted, or this story about this death is not reliable. There is not a single ancient non-Christian record in which anyone ever claims that the disciples refused to, recanted their story, changed their mind, walked away. Remember, in Mormonism, for example, you have 3 alleged witnesses to the golden plates. Those 3 witnesses either were chased out of the church or voluntarily left the church after they made this claim about the golden plates. Martin Harris was a member, I think, of 6 other Christian denominations after Mormonism. When you see someone is willing to walk away from a claim, they're probably not telling you the truth. Now, we don't have any record of that at all when it comes to Christendom in the first centuries. It'd be very easy to stop this nonsense, to stop this crazy thing called Christianity immediately by simply getting the body of Jesus and dragging it around town, or by getting any of those 12, actually a much larger group, to recant. Never happened. There's no record of that anywhere. That's powerful. But let me go back to this email for a second. Does that mean it's true? I think it's good evidence. But I'll tell you this. You might say in this generation, you'd be willing to die for what you believe as a Christian. That would have 0 evidential value. 0. Lots of people die for what they don't know is a lie. And those people who are flying bombs, exploding bombs and flying planes into buildings, they don't know if it's a lie. They are trusting that it's true, but they don't know. The 12, though, those who actually knew Jesus personally, they would have known if this was a lie. So their willingness to die for their claims is different than your willingness to die for their claims. You weren't there to really know. They were. If they're willing to go to their death and never recant, if they're willing just to suffer as an outcast and never recant, if they never recant, that's powerful evidence, because they aren't in our shoes. They were in their shoes. So in the end, there's a difference between first generation martyrdom and any martyrdom that followed that. And I wouldn't credit any martyrdom that follows those who were the actual eyewitnesses as being any kind of powerful evidence at all. The evidence, I think, stops with the observations of the eyewitnesses. All right, so I hope that kind of helps you as you kind of work through that. And I hope they'll give you some more reason to believe and trust that this is true. And I'll see you right here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.